Andrew Quinn, welcome to the Modern Sales Management Podcast.
Josh Paul, it's exciting to be here.
I've been looking forward to this conversation for so long. We've known each other for quite some time, and
Indeed.
we could talk about this all day long.
And we just might.
So before we get into some of the nuance of sales enablement, can you tell our audience how you got involved in sales enablement? Because when you got involved in it, it wasn't a thing.
Sure. You know, what's interesting, I think sales enablement has actually always existed. We've just called it different things. And in some respects, in my opinion, it's sort of this coalescing of a couple of different disciplines, right? Some people look at it as training. Some people look at it as sort of the sales operations side of things, or what used to be classed as sales support. Like I remember back to a company I worked in, 25 years ago, we had a sales support organization. And in many ways, they're doing exactly the same thing that we're doing in sales enablement. So I think it's always existed. It's just had different labels attached to it. For me, I was in sales and sales management for a long time. And, to be quite frank, I just got tired of chasing the number on that, monthly basis. But I really liked the discipline of sales. I am just constantly fascinated by the art of it, and I always wanted to be around it. And one of the easiest ways to do that is to start training people who are going to be salespeople. So that's really what I did as I got into the sales training side of things and getting new reps skilled up to train. I did that in a company before I joined HubSpot. That's actually what brought me to HubSpot, was to run the initial sales training operation. As that company has evolved, we've got locked into this whole idea of sales enablement. And I got asked to basically stand that organization up inside HubSpot a little over 3 years ago.
That's what a journey.
Indeed.
Yeah. What's changed? I mean, you say a lot of it's always been there, been the same. What has changed in the past 5 years in sales enablement?
I think the biggest things that have changed really revolve around the tech stack associated with enabling the sales organization. And there's this broader realization of the interconnectedness that each individual department needs to have relative to the impact it has on what the sales organization is setting out to do. And that, I think, is the big overarching change in sales enablement, is that realization that we all need to work in a coordinated fashion. And that coordination typically is coming together in some sort of tech-enabled way. And how do you blend, because sales is still a physical thing, right? It's people connecting and making decisions on what's valuable and what I'm willing to spend my hard-earned dollars for to accomplish something. That now marries up to a whole series of technical infrastructure to support those conversations that sales reps are having. And that's really, I think, where it's changed a lot is that interface of the people aspect of supporting the sellers and the technical aspect of supporting sellers.
I think a lot of companies get overwhelmed when they look at that big picture. Where are some, if you're going into a company, they don't have a sales enablement operation, but they could benefit from one. Where do you start if they're a little gun shy?
It's a great question, and it's a somewhat difficult one to answer because I find it's entirely dependent on the individual organizations. I have a lot of people approach me, and we talk about that individually, like companies that are starting to go down this road, or companies that started and the effort is a little bit off center and they need to get it lined up better. I'm always of the mind, do you know what your outcomes are? Because part of that is like, if you sat there and go, if my sales organization ran flawlessly, what would that look like? Like, can you envision in your mind's eye, if everything just worked the way that I wanted it to, what would that look like? And then you have to back into, well, like, where are we now? It's, your classic gaps analysis, right? Like, what is the desired state I really want this to be in relative to how my sales organization operates? What do I want them to do? What do I want them to say? How do I want them to say it? How do I get the least amount of like impediments out of their way? so that they can sell faster and sell bigger deals or whatever that may be. And where am I now, and how far away am I from that? And then, the next step is really to sit there and go, what changes could I make that are going to have the biggest impact with the least amount of effort? And that really is sales enablement, right? It's getting all these things out of your sellers' way so they can be effective, getting the friction out of their way, allowing them to do, what they do with the least amount of just things blocking them. Sometimes the blockers come inside the company, like the company's actually getting in their way. Sometimes it's market conditions. The market conditions are harder to solve for, but if we as the company are getting in their way, like there's no excuse for that. And a lot of times the salespeople will tell you what's in their way, right? And you just back into it and then say, what can I change that has the biggest impact with the least lift? And that's where you start your program.
I think your current state, desired state model is really powerful because it not only helps you explain things to executives, but it's a one-page thing, but it's a simple roadmap for the entire team to make sure that everybody is focused on having impact on sales.
Yeah, I agree.
It's not technology or process for technology and process sake.
Because the thing you want to always be mindful of is like, there's a lot of enablement technology coming out now, and it looks cool. And the problem you get into is like technology in search of a problem to solve. Like that's backwards, and that happens a lot. It's like, oh, this looks really cool. This will make it easy for salespeople to sell. Let's go buy that thing. And now you're trying to find the problems that you think it would solve in your organization, as opposed to the other way around of this is what an ideal way my team operates would look like, and what's solved by process, what's solved by technology, what's solved by go-to-market motions or what have you, what's solved by training, knowledge acquisition, behavior change. Those are all different things, and technology doesn't solve all that stuff. It solves some of them.
So I talk to sales leaders all the time, especially for this podcast. I talk to sales enablement professionals, and I talk to you. You're in both of those categories, but treating you as separate for this point. You talk about sales enablement without a technology first mindset. When I'll be excited about something, I'll bring it up to you and you'll say, yeah, that's cool, but it's really cool. And you'll bring up all these other things that they involve technology, but it's transfer of knowledge, it's change management, it's adoption. Talk about your thinking around that, because a lot of people could benefit from that.
So we've done a lot of trial and error around all this, and what I've really come to land on is that sales enablement at its core is change management, because the company's always looking for a new desired state, right? Like there's always some new thing that we're going to do because market conditions have changed or opportunities have presented themselves or something is, driving us to change, which might be, sell bigger deals, increase revenue, reduce costs. All that involves change of what we're currently doing. So I need to have a really clear picture of what is that desired state, as we talked about before, and where are we now? And how are we going to get from where we are now to where we want to be? And that boils down, in my opinion, to three basic things relative to a sales organization: skill adoption, knowledge acquisition, and behavior change. Because really, for anything that's going to happen with a sales organization, they need the skills to do it. They need to know what they need to do. And then they need to actually behave the way we need them to behave. And if I really isolate that, because we've had a bunch of changes in our business, as an example, a couple of different examples. One is GDPR, right? We operate in Europe. GDPR is a big deal. Now, our reps have been operating in a GDPR environment for a while, so they have the skills to do it. And they actually have the right behaviors. right? Excuse me, actually, they have the right skills, they know all about it, but we had a recent change where the way we were prospecting in LinkedIn, we couldn't do that anymore because they tweaked the rules a bit, and the way we were doing outreach in LinkedIn now is in violation of GDPR. So all we needed to do was change their behavior. There was a limited amount of knowledge acquisition there to change their perspective, but they really understood all this. They just needed to behave differently. So that enablement initiative was all about behavior. There's some other things we've done where like we've introduced some new sales approaches we want them to take. And in evaluating that, what they need new skills to be able to do this. They actually need more knowledge to be able to do this, and their behaviors have to change. And it's usually some combination of those three things that at the core make up any sort of thing you're trying to move in your sales organization. And that ends up affecting your technology decisions, your process decisions, your procedural decisions. All that stuff boils down to, do they have the skills to do it? Do they know what they're supposed to do? And do they actually execute those behaviors? And what do those behaviors need to look like?
So for each of those three buckets, can you talk about what works and what does not work in your experience in knowledge acquisition or behavioral change?
Sure.
Or skill, adding skills.
I'd actually like to turn that around for a second. I'm just curious, in your experience, when you think about those three things, like where have you seen it really gone wrong?
I'm a big proponent of simplicity or minimum effective dose, both in process and transfer of knowledge. And so anytime, and this is why, there's certain CRMs that drive me crazy. There's certain, you can complicate any technology, but it's the tug between simplicity and structure. Management wants the structure so that they know exactly what's going on in every aspect. If you get it too granular, you need that simplicity for people to actually use it and stick to using it. And that's the example that I see most, is not being simple enough for people to actually use.
Yeah, I've experienced that myself. I couldn't agree more. Like, it's simplicity, it's clarity, because sometimes some of this stuff it can be complicated, right? But it can always be reduced to simple parts. Mm-hmm. Like anything complicated is usually made up of smaller things that can be simpler. So how do I break this up in a way that the people that I need to move from where they are to where I need them to be can take that change on? Like, how do I reduce the cognitive lift for them?
And the ongoing cognitive lift. It's not just learning it once, but every time they have to interact with that part of the sales process, they need to rethink something, or they need to retain a framework in their head, or a set of definitions. I mean, a lot of the sales process is, this deal stage, to reach this deal stage, that means that this needed to happen. Well, if the labeling isn't right, or the definition's too complicated, or the way you're slicing it up doesn't make sense. It's sales enablement. I want to rename it salesperson enablement. Mm-hmm. Like, it's serving the human on the other side who needs to understand this.
But so you just brought up something which is a really, I would say, important thing that I genuinely believe in, and that is clarity of language. Because ultimately, a lot of selling revolves around language, and their interface with the technology, as an example, is language. Like, the sales process is essentially a series of definitions, and the less clear those things are, the harder it is for people to understand what they're supposed to do. Like, we've wrestled with this where, like, words like sales process, sales methodology, deal stages, sales steps, like, a lot of people use them interchangeably, and they're not interchangeable. They're actually discrete things, right? Like, the sales process are the specific steps that I'm going through as a rep to move a deal from A to B, right? And that could be my research, my prospecting, my connecting, so on and so forth. The methodology is, what am I doing within each one of those steps? How am I actually executing? The deal stages might not actually line up with each sales process step. One deal stage might actually contain two sales process steps, which is entirely possible. And when people are talking about this stuff and they're conflating those terms, the sales team doesn't know what you're talking about. You got to be really deliberate in what this stuff means. When you're sort of lazy with the language, um, that's where this stuff tends to go sideways.
It's the number one reason why things become the Wild West inside your sales platform. We have a kind of a somewhat of a secret sauce to getting this right for companies. And I think you and I, we've talked about this. We call it a lead management blueprint, and there's two parts of it. One is definitions. These are it's the language and the definitions associated with them for deal stages, next actions, lead statuses, all of that.
Mm-hmm.
Has to be simple, has to be sales rep friendly, has to be mutually exclusive, and that they have to be driven by data that you can point to. Something can't fit in two deal stages at once.
And everybody in leadership needs to agree on that stuff.
Agreed upon across the organization. And so the way that we get these right is the second part of this, and that is we extract scenarios from one of our initial workshops. These are all the scenarios, all of the ways that data is going to get into your system and move through your system. Do the steps in the process change for different products, for different territories, for larger deals, for smaller deals? All of those scenarios need to be accommodated inside your system. And so we have these definitions and we have these scenarios, and we use the scenarios to break the definitions on paper first and then in the system. So by the time it gets to a sales team, it's been put through the ringer with business specific scenarios, all that we could extract and all that the company could think of.
Hey, because then what you're doing is you're ultimately configuring that system, right? Because at this stage of the game, everybody needs to be operating this CRM. If you're doing any type of sales at any type of scale,
right,
you need a system like that to manage all of that. But the system should not be in the way of the salesperson doing their job. Ideally, the system enhances the job that the rep is doing. And too many times, people don't do the diligence up front that you're talking about and all that defining and the exploration of the scenarios so that they configure things that actually don't match up to the actual workflow that the rep executes against. And the system ends up becoming an impediment, which is then you start getting the workarounds and the doing stuff outside of the system to, track my pipeline or manage my leads. Like it's all happening outside because the system just is making it harder.
Right. And that's, salespeople are good at a lot of things. They aren't good at creating process and creating their own process. They're good at building relationships. They don't want to be in charge of creating their own architecture for tracking things and building their own automation.
Well, here's the thing with salespeople. I've heard this phrase used, and I really don't like it. That notion that salespeople are coin operated. I think that actually is overly simplistic. What I will say is that salespeople look for the path of least resistance to a dollar, because ultimately, they're measured by the dollars they're bringing in, right? The deals they're closing is measured in the amount of the profitability in that deal, or the monthly recurring revenue, annual recurring revenue, whatever that monetary measurement is. But ultimately, that's what their quota is. So they're looking for the path of least resistance to that outcome. And if that path is not inside your system, they will find it. And they will go down that path.
That's such a good point.
And then once they're on that path, they don't want to leave it because they know that path is predictable. That, hey, even though I'm doing these, hacking off, system stuff, I've cobbled together a way that's easiest for me to get to the outcome that I need. It's like water, finding the lowest point. They will absolutely do that.
Right, and you make a good point about they won't come off it because a lot of this is about trust, and especially the change management piece. If you've broken their trust or you've lost them in terms of, hey, we're going to give you a process and the tool set, and it ends up being really clunky, they're going to go find a better way. And then when you come back and say, hey, we've made improvements, they're like, nah, too late.
Absolutely right. Couldn't agree more.
And so it's one thing to say, you need to have clear language. It's another thing to give them a path or a process to create that language. That's a lot harder to do.
So question for you, Josh, like this all seems so obvious. Why do companies struggle to get this right? Like you work with all kinds of companies trying to establish this type of thing. Why is it hard for them?
I think this is HubSpot's fault. And let me explain that. Because we mainly work in the HubSpot platform. HubSpot has created a CRM that is so usable and simple that it creates this double-edged sword where it's really easy to configure. The clicks, clicking around in the system, really easy, which also means it's really easy to set it up in an inefficient way.
Mm.
So, I mean, we tell people 80% of what we do is psychology and process and adoption, and 20% is technology tricks. And if you're just operating and you're like, hey, on my drive home yesterday, I was thinking about our sales process, and I think I've boiled it down to 4 steps. I'm going to go click, click, click. Look, and I even built it in the system in 15 minutes. That doesn't mean that it's right. It doesn't mean that it's been run through the necessary filters to make sure that it's simple enough and usable enough for your specific sales team, market, and process.
Mm-hmm. Sorry about that.
No, and people will agree, and that's when they end up coming to us is like, we've built this, it's not working. We know we can change this, but we don't want to keep banging our head against the wall and frustrating our sales team.
We've wrestled with this too, which is like sometimes you're just too close to the problem. And I don't mean you, I'm talking the people inside the organization that are trying to solve that sales process problem.
I think it's
like we were wrestling with that. We had a bunch of different flavors of our sales process, a lot of different things that we were doing, and we wanted to get more consistent across all the different sales teams. And it ultimately required, bringing in some external folks to look at it and basically shine a light on it and say, this is all actually the same. You're just using different language. Let's all standardize that stuff. Like it's remarkable how, easy it is for that sort of drift to happen inside your organization. And sometimes you need somebody with fresh eyes to look at it and point out the obvious.
It's interesting. And I don't think there's magic behind fresh eyes. It's not like they, now notice a deal stage that you didn't notice. I think outside people, especially if you've been in that world and you've optimized sales processes for a while, you come with frameworks. And so we never, you can't come in and say, oh, that's exactly what I would change. You say, let's go through our process and build it from the ground up. We may arrive really close to where you are today, but you need to put in the work to make sure that it accommodates all of the scenarios and is simple enough for your team. So what sets a world-class sales enablement department? Well, first of all, sales enablement's a discipline, not a department. Talk about that.
That is correct.
Break that down for me, because I stole that from you. Anyone listening to this, I did not make that up. That is going to be the subtitle of your book that you're going to write someday.
Right. I wish I could lay claim to that too, but actually there's a book and it's written by, let me just look really quickly. It's written by Byron Matthews and Tamara Shank. It's called Sales Enablement. It's on in Wiley. It's called A Master Framework to Engage, Equip, and Empower a World-Class Sales Force. And that's actually where I got it from. These were folks that are part of the research arm. It was called CSO Insights. I believe it still is. It was a component of Miller Heiman, but Miller Heiman was recently acquired by Korn Ferry. But I got my hands on this book about 3.5 years ago. And it really lays out this idea that sales enablement isn't a department, because this is what's happening in a lot of organizations is the department carries the label, and then all of a sudden, like all the problems are solved, we've got sales enablement. Well, you really don't. It is a discipline inside the business, no different than like the annual planning discipline, right? or the financial discipline that you put in place, and the protocols that people follow relative to engaging with the financial side of the business, or any other type of business process. It's a similar thing. I can actually show you a quick metaphor that I use for this. So let me share my screen really quickly. So Josh, imagine, if you will, a harmless drop of water, right? In and of itself, it's a beautiful, life-giving thing. However, when you put a lot of this water together, this is what you get, right? Which is an enormously powerful wave. And if I were to stand in front of this just on the shore and this was coming at me, that is an incredibly intimidating thing to look at. Now, if you imagine that critical new thing that you want your sellers to do, and let's say I'm an individual in the finance department, or I'm an individual over in the product department, and I need the sellers to do this new thing, or I'm a marketer and I've got this new approach I want the salespeople to take. Like, I'm looking at that as this discrete drop of water. The problem is, you're not the only one with a critical new thing you need the salespeople to do. So if you imagine that salesperson, when they're looking out at all those drops of water, this is what a salesperson sees coming at them, right? And at HubSpot, this is what it looks like. On any given month, all these things are just flowing in at the sales organization. And the salespeople look at that and they go, I got to hit my monthly quota. Forget it. I'm going to ignore all this stuff. They're going to run away from all this and just focus on delivering, because it's, a week from the end of the month, or it doesn't matter where it is in the month. They're like, forget it. And they end up not adopting the change that you need them to adopt. And the solution to knock all that down, well, we all say it's sales enablement. And ultimately, that's what we're striving to do, right? Is take all this and knock it down like this. And that's really what sales enablement strives to do. But this is where it becomes a discipline versus a department, because what the sales enablement team needs to do is essentially be the governing body that coordinates, sequences, and communicates all of these changes that are well-intentioned from all these different groups, right? They all want the best for the sales organization and the best for the company. But what they don't realize is that as they all do this independently, trying to help the sales team, they're actually creating a giant wave of anxiety that's flowing at the sales organization, and they just want to run away from it. And the sales enablement team really is the group that sequences all of that and coordinates it and understands, like, how much cognitive lift is the sales organization facing? Can this thing wait 3 weeks? And let's sequence it in here. And let's communicate it this way. And the communications are another key part. Like, one of the things that we used to do for a long time, we ended up fixing all this, but like, the sales managers and the sales reps would learn about key changes at the same time. So what would happen is the meeting would end, or that communication would occur. The reps would go to the managers, hey, what am I supposed to do about this thing? And the manager would go, I don't know, I just learned about it at the same time you did. Like, that's not sequencing, and that's not effective communication. So, your senior leaders need to know about it, then your managers need to know about it before the reps know about it, so the managers know what they need to do to help the reps navigate the change. Like, that's what sales enablement's all about, is coordinating and sequencing and communicating in service of all the different change that has to happen, right? And we're looking, like I said before, at what type of skills are needed, what type of knowledge is needed, and what type of behaviors need to be present to go from where we are to where we need to be.
I love how this is, it's not a technology conversation. It starts with monitoring and being the traffic cop for cognitive lift, placing a premium on your salesperson's ability to consume and digest information and focus on what's important, and then sequencing what reaches them. I mean, you're a salesperson's best friend. Like, you are the protector of the sales mindset and the salesperson's time and focus. And then sequencing communication. I don't know that a lot of people think of it that way. Are you are you seeing a lot and reading a lot that this is what sales enablement is, or?
I'm seeing it start to move in this direction.
Okay.
I see people starting to realize that the technical fix isn't enough. That it's that whole like technology in search of a problem versus we've identified the problem and technology is the appropriate solution for it. Like our enablement tech stack is actually pretty thin. Like we don't have a ton of enablement technology. We have a wiki where we have the majority of our information, and that's where we store it. We use LinkedIn Navigator, we use Gong, we use HubSpot CRM. We use a tool called Tiled for some playbook type stuff. I mean, there's not much there. We're starting to look at, an enablement content management system. There's a couple of different ones out there where you're able to, sort of manage through permissions who sees what content. We're starting to explore with that idea. We're in a sales organization with 700 salespeople.
Right.
We don't have an overly robust tech stack in that regard.
So I want to wrap up this conversation.
Sure.
We could go on and on. I want to wrap it up talking about what does sales enablement look like 2 years from now, 4 years from now?
That is it's a tough question, Josh. I'm not a good prognosticator. What I hope for, though, is that it looks more like I don't want to put it. It becomes an essential function inside the business. That it's no longer this sort of trendy thing to do. Like it is a legitimate function within the business, just like marketing, sales, services, accounting, what have you. Like it's this established thing. It's very clear the role that it plays. Senior leaders understand that role and they buy into the charter associated with that, and they're essentially providing that key engagement and support of what that function does. We've been lucky enough to have that, where our senior leaders are heavily invested in this idea of enablement in the way I described it. That makes all the difference. Whereas a lot of it comes from the sales VP or sales director is I need somebody in sales enablement. And they're really thinking sales training.
Right.
That's what happens a lot. And I'd like to see that stop where, enablement equals training. Training is actually a lever enablement can pull, but it's not the only one. There's a number of them. And that perspective on what enablement actually is evolves. And it ends up being the technology, the people, the processes, and the discipline are all clearly, understood. And I would say more consistent, because right now it's all over the map. Every company does it different.
Right. Sales enablement as a term, we've talked about this word. It drives me nuts because it either means too much to too many people, or it means nothing to somebody. And it seemed for a while like there were the only people who would talk up sales enablement or people who are trying to sell sales enablement services or consulting. But I think it's going to get to where you say it might go if people can look at it in the way that you've laid out over the past half an hour.
I think it's essential. And there's a number of groups that are trying to push that in that direction, right? The Sales Enablement Society, the stuff that CSO Insights was doing around sales enablement. There's the group that puts on the sales enablement soiree. I forget which group that is, but ATD is starting to do some things around sales enablement. There seems to be a coalescing of perspective around what this discipline actually is and how it should work.
I'm excited to see where it goes. Andrew Quinn, thank you very much for this conversation. I think it's going to be really beneficial to our audience. What if people want to connect with you, learn more about your views on this, where can they find you online?
My pleasure, Josh. LinkedIn is the easiest place. LinkedIn/Andrew T. Quinn. You'll find me there. Or you can always email me at aquinn@hubspot.com. That's pretty straightforward.
Perfect. I really appreciate it. And that does it for this episode of the Modern Sales Management Show. Have a great day.